Okay, so Be'ezras Hashem, Lichtige Chanukah, and today we're going to dive into one of Rebbe Nachman's later tales, a vision of sorts that Rabbeinu had a year before his passing in 1809, called Oreach Nichnas, a guest enters. We've spoken about this story elsewhere in other times, and Be'ezras Hashem will continue teaching this story every Chanukah, Ad V'Yesko Tzedek. And this story, like any of the stories that Rabbeinu brought down, or any of the tales or the visions, we have to ensure that first and foremost we keep in mind that we don't know what it means. And we don't know other than that which is explicitly written. But they were offered to us in order to darshan them, in order to find hisorus, in order to find a reorientation, a path towards tshuva. All of the stories are meant to wake us up. The visions are meant to wake us up. That's the reason that tzaddikim bring down their visions and their malbish, their visions in ideas and concepts in letters, that they engarb it within mishalim and metaphors. Now, that's not to say that the external casing of the metaphor is insignificant and all that matters is the inner content, because ultimately all we have is the metaphor. But in understanding the preciousness of the metaphors that the tzaddikim gave us, the stories, the visions, the tales, the dimyon, the mara, the kedusha, the holy vision that these tzaddikim beheld, in the place that they beheld it, the das of the tzaddikim amitim, the yechidei hadoros, the rosh bayis of the generation, the tzaddik who receives the loftiest levels of makifin, of insight, when they bring that down and they're malbishit in accordance with what's needed for the generation, then Bnei Yisrael are capable of drawing strength from those teachings. And so we can read the words and we can attach ourselves to the words and understand what we understand and not understand what we don't understand. There's also a way of trying to understand what it means for us, trying to translate it. An act of translation, which is not attempting to claim that this is the essential meaning of the vision, but it's a potential expression of one form of the shine of this vision as I understand it. And so with that proper orientation, we can understand that these visions, these illuminations of the Tzaddik Yesod Olam of Nachal Neve'em Makor Chachma, Rebbe Nachman ben Fega, Schus Yogen Aleinu, that the visions that this tzaddik gave us, the Torahs, the Tfilos, the revelations, the points of hope and the drops of light that the tzaddik provided for the generations, that Haneros Halalu Kadeshem, they're holy, there's a sanctity to them, they're removed from us, we don't understand, especially when it comes to the Sipurim, especially when it comes to the visions. V'yefshar lishtamesh bahem ela leroisem bilvad, and we don't have the right to manipulate them or to use them, rather to just gaze at them and understand them. But once we understand that all we can truly do is to gaze at them and to read the words, then for the sake of medicine, we can figure out what this can potentially mean for us. We can figure out how this can have an impact on my regular life. And so this is a tale that Rabbeinu beheld on the first night of Hanukkah after the first night's licht in 1809. And it's a vision that took place by the candles. It's a vision, it's a story, it's an expression. And the fact that it's written down means that Hashgacha Pratis wants that we should be able to access this, that this is beneficial, Kisvu Zos Lador Acharon, that it's important for us to believe in the potency of these ideas. And so we're going to read it together, this haunting, beautiful, destabilizing tale, and hopefully utilize it to spark light, hopefully utilize it to enable ourselves to find more light within our faces, to find more light within the world, to gaze on through any elements of darkness, the painful, painful, painful reality of darkness, and to begin to gaze so deeply into it that we can behold and perceive the dream or the laughter of the future laughter that's going to be revealed at the end of the difficult vision. That at the end of the squinting of the eyes and a person sees farther than what reality is presenting in front of them, and they glance deeper into the light beyond what the light itself is revealing, so then a person has the ability of drawing comfort and a comfort that comes when Klal Yisrael is capable of changing its mind, of reorienting, of seeing Hashem where we didn't think Hashem was a moment before, and davening that HaKadosh Baruch Hu ultimately send the true guest, the one we're all waiting for, which is Mashiach Tzidkenu. When the one who is coming arrives here at last, the light of Mashiach Tzidkenu, the light of Mashiach ben Yosef, Mashiach ben David, Moshe Rabbeinu, this real light of redemption is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu needs to send down. Anything else is secondary to that demand, secondary to the demand of the Chanukah Sabayis through Mashiach Tzidkenu, Mashiach ben David. That's what we're hoping for. That's what we're yearning for. That's what every ayin is mitzapa to. That's what every breath is holding for. That's what every ounce of pain is searching out. And in the meantime, until that Hesach Hadas takes shape and HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals the true guest, the Oireach Nichnas, the true light of Mashiach Tzidkenu, so then what we're able to do is cultivate and dig down deep into the caverns of the words of the tzaddikim and to make it work for us and to reveal the medicine for us. So this is a story. It was seen, it was beheld in the time of Hanukkah, on the first night of Hanukkah in 1809. So the story goes as follows. There's a guest that enters into the home of an individual at nighttime, and he encounters the host. And he asks the balabayas, from where do you draw your parnasa? Where do you draw your vitality and your sustenance? And the owner answers him, I don't have any specific set way in my home of drawing my parnasa. I draw my vitality and my sustenance from the world. And the guest again asks the Bal Habayas, what are you learning? What are you studying? And the Bal Habayas answers him. And they continued in a conversation together until it got deeper and deeper, and the words began to flow forth from the heart. And the Bal Habayas began to yearn, ma'od. What was awoken with him was a deep spiritual yearning and a spiritual desire and an unsettledness within himself to want to reach more. How, in what way can a person actually accomplish something, grasp something in terms of holiness? And the guest says to him, Ani elmod imcha, I will learn with you. I will learn with you. The Tema Balabayas, and the Balabayas was stunned because he hadn't said it out loud. Perhaps this guest who's awakened such a desire towards holiness within me is actually not a person at all. But in the end, he saw that he could return and speak to him as a normal human being, so he didn't think much of it. The Balabayas is the person who's situated within a pre-existing setting. When I'm host in my house, I know where things are found, I know where things are placed, and there's a domestication to reality. It's a place of comfort and that which is known. Each and every person wants to be at home, a feeling of homeliness, unheimlichkeit, unhomeliness, a certain strange sense in this world, something that's unheimlich. So then a person feels like they're at the thread of the outside. A person in this world wants to be on the inside. Our first memory is being on the inside, is being in the womb, is being protected in that place. That's the bias, that's the remez to the Beis HaMikdash. There was a time in our earliest memories where we were at home. And therefore, most of our desires throughout life, throughout the waking days of the year, is to domesticate reality, to be an owner, to be a Bal Habayis, to know what's what, to know where it is and when it's going to happen and how it's going to happen. And then suddenly, within that fragile and delicate space of comfort and structure that a person cultivates for themselves, something unknown appears. Something foreign, something from the outside, something other, beyond that which is already considered within my mind. And anytime that there's something new that's unidentified, it brings with it a change. It disrupts the regular functioning system. And it enters in and it disrupts, it forces things to reorient themselves. We're surprised by something, a certain destabilization takes place. A new person enters into our lives, a new reality. This is an oireach, a guest. A guest enters in and it disrupts the pre-existing order that the mind felt that it had. And this is true also with regards to the way that we function. Let's say as we've been speaking about so much, that the self can be considered in three layers. There's the body, there's the heart, and there's the mind. There's the nefesh, which is the body. There's the ruach, which is the emotional frequencies that emerge from the meaning-making process of translating emotions into feelings, which is the heart. And then there's the mind, that's the seichel. And we know that the body, the heart, and the mind, while they occupy the self, and these are elements of ourselves that we have access to, more often than not, we're only orienting ourselves towards our bodies and our hearts. We operate with a nefesh and a ruach. Ner Hashem nishmas Adam. The ner of Hashem, the candle of Hashem, is the nefesh, the body, and the ruach, and the heart. And when that candle is set, then the neshama can be shown. The neshama shebemochi, the neshama shebesichli. The neshama is always present, but it's not always activated. The nefesh and the ruach are always there. I have a feeling, and I know what it means to feel something physically. And I know the viscerality of emotions when they express themselves down into the body. That's the nefesh and the ruach. That's the ner. That's the candle. The neshama is the illumination that gets lit on the candle and it shines. The candle is not always going to be lit. It always has the possibility of being lit, but it's not always going to be lit. So too with the neshama. The neshama shebemochi, the neshama is internalized like the nefesh and the ruach. It's not something that's outside of us like a chaya or yechida. It's not some transcendental ideal. It's the real space of meaning making and thinking in my mind. A real thought that influences the heart to the degree that it has the capacity of forming a position on reality. That neshama is not always activated. And so we can also think about it as follows. The Bal Habayis is the typical way in which we function, the way that we know ourselves to be, our bodies and our feeling centers. The posture, the neural pathways through which we walk around this world, in the imaginings that we imagine about ourselves and about other people, and we remain kind of caught up within that repetitious cycle of life confirming my biases about it. That's my nefesh and that's my ruach. That's how I walk around. I'm a balabayas in that place. Nobody knows our coping mechanisms and our twisted ways of thinking better than ourselves. We're the balabayas over all of our mishagasim. And the neshama, when the neshama comes to shine itself, when there's a moment of illumination, of neshama shenasata b'tohirahi, and the neshama is meir onto the guf, and the mind and the body and the heart are now receiving an insight from the neshama, which we know is ruach hakodesh, which we know is neshama shenasata b'tohirahi. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu whispering new levels of insight into ourselves. That level of insight, that level of positivity, that new way of looking at things appears as a guest. It appears in my life as a guest because it's foreign to my operating system as it operates right now. My operating system right now is my nefesh and my ruach, my body and my emotions. And when I feel things very intensely, I feel them and I can't break free of them. Or when the body feels something, it's caught up within that body. That's the active state of the self. The neshama, on the other hand, that's a visitation from a lofty place where a person feels an awakening, an awakening. And the nature of these awakenings, the nature of these ha'aros, the nature of the neshama and the neshima and the deep breath and the settledness of mind, is that more often than not, it comes and it goes very quickly. It illuminates and it dissipates. It comes to shine light on the nefesh and the ruach. It comes into the balabayas. It illuminates the world. And then suddenly, as quickly, it departs. And the balabayas is not changed as a result of it. Because the balabayas has not relinquished control on the narrative. He's still operating with the mindset of nefesh and ruach, my body and my heart. But the question ultimately is what makes a visitation from the neshama? What makes an illumination from above something that is lasting? What ensures that the ha'ara of the tzaddik, the ha'ara of the neshama, not only illuminates for but a moment, but that it lasts and that it remains and that it actually has an impact on the person's life? Phrased differently, what would it take for us to incorporate new spiritual insight or new methods of well-being in our psychological and spiritual lives? What would it take to bring them into our lives? What would it take to live with them? What would it take to ensure that these ideas not remain some surrounding dormant capacity to rely upon in moments of stress, but what would happen if I actually lived with this? What would life look like if I actually shifted gears and enabled the soul to secrete a little bit more of its wisdom into the nefesh and the ruach so that I become an ish eloki, a godly person, a person who lives with dveikus and connection to God? What would it take? That's the question that we're expressing here. More often than not, the Balabayas welcomes the guest and the guest departs. But here on Hanukkah, by the nair, which is the nefesh and the ruach, on the first light, when we're lighting that nair and we're trying to illuminate the neshama, we're trying to allow bina to drip down, to allow the alma de asi, the world of the future, the world of illumination, the ever-present nature of the activity of the neshama. When it's activated, it's drawing down lights from far beyond itself. It's drawing down chachma and keser, which is ultimately drawing down from the loftiest places of all, which is the source of all light, the ma'or itself, kaviyachol. HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chvodo v'atzmo. The neshama is just the interface in which this stream unfolds within the mind. And so on Hanukkah, when we're lighting the nair, the nefesh and the ruach, and we're contemplating the fact that I'm a body with a feeling heart, but I have not yet lived with the illumination of the neshama, the question becomes, how do I welcome this guest in the right way? How do I ensure that this guest is going to be able to leave an impression within my mind? Now, Hanukkah is ripe for this because Hanukkah is the guest. It's welcoming the guest of the Or Haganos. We're welcoming a hidden, concealed light into our lives. It's the light of Ches. Oireach is Or Ches, the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh says. It's the light of Bina. The eighth sphera, the eighth world, B'nai Bina, Yemei Shmona, 8 days, children of understanding. The light of Bina, Eim Habanim Smecha, the place of the neshama, is the source of illumination. It's the world to come. But it's the world to come that's perpetually dripping into our minds. And so on Hanukkah, when we're welcoming the guest of the light of Bina, the question becomes, how do I actually ensure that this light has an impression on me, that it shifts the way I function, that it changes the way that I live as a parent, as a spouse, as a child, as a sibling, as a teacher, as a student, as a friend, as a coworker, as a boss? How do I spark more light? How do I illuminate the world around me? How do I shine light on other neshamos? That's the ultimate question. That's what we need to ask. Not just how does the guest visit and then leave, because that's just the spiritual tourism. The question is, how does the guest enter and shift everything? How does the neshama enter and remind the nefesh and the ruach, the body and the emotional feeling center, that it's not the end all be all of the story, but there's a neshama shenasat to be tohirehi, that there's a purified spirit, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is thinking through the human being. How do we begin to live with that? And that's what we see, that the Balabayas in this first paragraph is suddenly accosted by the guest. The guest is the one who walks in, and suddenly the guest is acting like he's the Balabayas. The guest asks the Balabayas, Me'ayin parnasasecha, where do you draw your vitality from? Where do you draw your sustenance from? That's not the typical order of things. A guest doesn't come in and make himself the host immediately. The host is the host, and the host asks the guest the questions. But over here, when the neshama is really going to have an impact, and the guest is not just going to be a novel moment, but it's actually going to have a shift. So the Balabayas has to allow themselves to be put into question. We have to allow ourselves to be put into a position of questionableness, of allowing ourselves to ask ourselves questions. My Hanukkah, what is this? My is Hanukkah, the ability to ask ourselves the question of Hey Chanani ba'olam, where do I stand in the world? That is what Hanukkah is itself. And so the Balabayas, us, our nefesh and our ruach, our body and our feeling heart, we open up our home and we let the illumination of the neshama come in. And instead of telling the neshama what to do, to make sure that it doesn't linger too long and it doesn't have too much of an impact, we relinquish control for a moment and we say, okay, let me be put into question by this illumination. Let me act as if this oireach, this guest, this moment of achnasas orchim, let me see, maybe the neshama has something to teach me. Maybe if I allow myself to be decentered for a moment by the dizzying sense of moreness that comes with a moment of spiritual insight, maybe, just maybe, I won't lose myself, but I'll become a better version of myself. And so in putting the self into question, the first question is, Me'ayin parnasasecha, where are you drawing your vitality from? Meaning, what do you identify as? What are you? What's your working model? And the Balabayas, The Balabayas, who's the Ner, who's the Nefesh and the Ruach, who's typically identifying with the body and the heart, the emotional feeling center, without allowing the light of the intellect to enter in. He answers the Heshiv Lo, Ainli Parnasa Kavua Bebeti, Rak Chayaisi Min Ha'olam. In my house, in my mind, in me, I don't have a active way of engaging with the neshama. There's no direct flow of the neshama. Ainli parnasa kavua bebesi. It's not sturdy. The parnasa, the shefa, the way of awakening myself, it's not sturdy. It's not bikvia. Sometimes it comes, sometimes it goes. It's illumination for moments, but the guest never really stays too long. But I draw my vitality from the olam, from he'elem, from the nefesh and the ruach, from the ner Hashem, nishmas adam. The ner is there, shisha yemei bereshis, fix the nefesh and the ruach. That's going to be equal for nearly every level of creature. Nishmas Yisrael has more of an access point to the ruach, to ruach hakodesh, and it's fundamentally different. But nefesh and ruach, that's the way of the world. And so the Balabayas is saying, I don't have a direct access point to drawing down the vitality of the neshama. I don't have that spiritual fount in my mind. I draw my vitality primarily from the olam, from the zayin imei ha'olam, which correspond to the parts of Zer Anpin and Malchus, which is the nefesh and the ruach, and not bina. V'sha'alo, and the neshama, the guest, goes on to ask, and bina is the light of the she'ela, it's the light of the question, it's mi bara ela. To destabilize the Eila is the Ruach and the Nefesh, that which I know, that which is identifiable, that which is domesticated. The Mi Bara Eila is where does it come from, which puts us into question, which forces us to wonder, which brings us back to faith. And so Bina again questions the self, which is established in its body and heart orientation. Ma'ata lomed, so what are you learning? At least the limud has the ability of drawing down wisdom from above. Limud HaTorah Lishma has the ability of drawing down a constant flow of illumination, even if a person is not experiencing spiritual illumination. The Heshiv Lo, and he answers him, but for him, it wasn't specific. The learning wasn't doing it. The spiritual exposure that he had in his bias with his Ruach and his Nefesh, it wasn't being mitlahev him. It wasn't awakening him with anything. And then suddenly the Balabayas begins to feel a hishtoikakus and a ga'aguin ma'oid eich magiyim masigim ezadavish b'kedusha. Suddenly, when we begin to stop identifying so much with that basic operating system of the nefesh and the ruach, the body and its emotional responses, in that closed neurocircuitry of the self, so immediately we begin to wonder, what would it be like to live with the neshama? And what happens is we begin to be mishtokek u'mitka'ageya ma'od. At first, it's an anonymous hishtoikakus and a ga'aguim. It doesn't know yet where it wants to go. The neshama, first and foremost, illuminates the self, and it says there's a yearning, there's a burning desire here for something more. Now, that moreness, if it doesn't go directly to holiness, we know where it can take us. It could take us back down to the body itself, God forbid. But over here, the hishtoikikus and the ga'aguim that were awoken, ma'od, meaning to say from within the intensity, I want to go upwards. The question is, how do I reach and grasp something holy? Reaching alone, the guest comes in sometimes, but it doesn't disrupt the balabayas. And so the balabayas might feel that he's reaching spirituality because I have a nefesh, I have a ruach, and sometimes the candle could be lit, but that's not enough. We want to arrive at that place and we want to grasp it. We want to be able to see it. There's a level of viyagia, of getting to that place, and then there's a level of masigim also. And that's right here, the moment of the awakening of Hanukkah, the moment of the chinuch, of the madama, of elevating our dimyon back upwards, is not the question of how do I reach a level of spirituality, but how do I reach it and how do I grasp it? How do I draw it back down? How do I destabilize my sense of ownership of the self by way of my limited perspective of the nefesh and ruach? How do I draw more neshama into me? Amar lo ha'orech, the guest says to him, Ani elmod imcha. I'm going to learn with you. I'm going to teach you. Now, Amar lo ha'orech is Roshei Tevos Leah, because Leah is that place of Bina that descends down into the Nefesh and the Ruach to awaken it. I'm going to learn with you. Ani elmod imcha. The neshama now is taking control. The neshama is saying, I'm going to leave my impression. I'm going to leave the mark. But here's where the pachad sets in. Here's where the ambiguity sets in when it comes to understanding true spiritual insight that can have an impact on our lives, where we can draw down a new awareness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a new awareness of the Torah HaKadosh, a new awareness of a spiritual way of looking that alleviates the burdensome ways we experience this world. Because suddenly, when he comes to realize that there's something powerful here, that the neshama doesn't necessarily need to know what the nefesh and the ruach says. He doesn't express what he's thinking. The nefesh and the ruach begin to think that they're in control. And then suddenly, when the neshama shows up and it says, no, I know what you're going through already. Even if you haven't told me, I know what's going on in the ruach and the nefesh, because suddenly we come to realize that, wait a second, the nefesh and the ruach, the body and the heart and the feelings and the narrative structures of our emotional entanglement, maybe that's not the end all be all. Maybe that's not the end of the story. Maybe there's another narrative point. And suddenly, when a person begins to realize that the way that I've been looking at myself for so long, and the limited perspective and the limited conception of self, which is contained in the nefesh and the ruach, when a person begins to realize that that's not as firm and thick as we actually assumed it to be, there's a pachad. There's a pachad that happens when we begin to feel the intimations of positive change that can come about in our lives, because we very often want to fall back on the old stumbling blocks and say, I love my master. I love my master. Why was Leah hated? Why was Leah hated? Why was Leah despised? The Zohar HaKadosh teaches us that from here we see that a person despises that which they can't grasp. That Leah is the intimation of a level that is not yet grasped, but that is emerging into graspability. It's the Alma de Iskasya. And very often the typical operating system that doesn't want to grow in accordance with its true depth and its true fount of soul, it's going to despise that spiritual illumination, and it's going to quiet it, and it's going to muffle its sound because it doesn't want to change, because change is scary. Kol haschalos kashos, because letting go of what I thought I needed is a difficult thing to do. And so in that place, all of the natural defense mechanisms come in, and the nefesh and the ruach, which were open and in a state of suggestibility towards being inspired by the neshama, maybe there's something faulty here. Maybe I don't really have to take this too seriously. Maybe there's a reason that I shouldn't take this spiritual moment, this moment of coming to consciousness of what I need to do in this world and how I need to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu and how much I need HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Maybe it's coming from other places and maybe I don't have to listen to it. And very often it's that first resistance against spiritual growth, that first resistance of changing our minds, that the opportunity to change our minds breaks down, because we close it off and we send the guest out again and we say, nope, I'm the balabayas here. You're not an Adam Klal. I want to push you out. But on Hanukkah, on the first night of Hanukkah, where Abinu is bringing down into existence, is that Chazar v'ra'a shehu medaber imo k'derech b'nei Adam. But he returned, Chazar v'ra'a. He turned and he looked. It wasn't just viagia, it was v'yira'eh, to see. He gazed and he looked at the situation, and instead of dispelling the spirituality as some momentary blip on the radar, he actually leaned into it. He returned back to it. And he realized that, no, this is maybe something that I can integrate. This level of spirituality, maybe it is. Maybe I do have the vessels to live in this way. Maybe I can live with Das of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Maybe I can taste the light of the Or HaGanuz. Maybe I can see the world as it truly is, mitzad yichud ilah. How else am I going to survive if I don't pretend that I can? And so instead of dispelling the guest and kicking the guest away, as chazer v'ra'ashu medaber imo k'derech b'nei Adam. So the balabayas, the nefesh and the ruach, the body and its all of its feelings and emotional entanglement and learned helplessness are now open to the light of the neshama to see what would happen if we give this guest a little bit more freedom. What would happen if we begin to identify less as the balabayas, but more as a guest of this guest, a guest of realizing that, wow, I thought I was in charge, but clearly there's a deeper part of myself. And Rabbeinu continues in the vision and he says as follows. Immediately after restoring his vision and looking twice and realizing that, no, I want to take the spiritual insight seriously, he immediately strengthened himself with faith and to trust this illumination, to trust this guest. V'hitchil tekef lekoro Rebbe. He immediately began to call him my master, my teacher, and he says, first and foremost, I'm asking you, teach me how to properly treat you, how to treat you with proper respect. And obviously, I don't want to do anything that would offend you, God forbid, to offend your honor. But also, alas, I'm a human being, I'm a Ben Adam, and it's still very difficult for me to protect myself completely to make sure I'm doing the right thing. And therefore, I'm asking you, please teach me how to properly treat you, how to be noheg with the proper kavod to you. And the guest answers, the neshama says, Ke'es eini panai, right now I don't have time. Another time I'll come back to you and I'm going to teach you this. But for now, I need to leave here. So what happens when we begin to try and draw the neshama down into our lives? When we begin to try and feel the neshama in our experiences? When we begin to try and shift out of our bodily orientation, out of our constricted mindset, out of our smallness, out of our ben adamkeit. The ben adam is the nefesh and the ruach. It's where I'm stuck in all of these tendencies. When I begin to shift, when a person begins to accept that there might be a way of thinking, new information is coming to light that's going to help me look at myself differently, look at the world differently, sweeten the way in which I look at the world. So then there's an all too human desire to jump not only towards actualization, but also to ensure continuity, to ensure the perpetuality of this illumination. Once a person feels that, okay, I want to change, something needs to change. So I want to hold on to it. I want to grab hold of it. And I want to say, let this last forever. If I am going through the work of spiritual change, if I'm shifting my consciousness, if I'm making a choice to think more about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then I want to do it and I want it to last forever. I want to do it in such a way that it's never going to fall, it's never going to break, and I want to do it perfectly. That's the all too human infantile reaction to moments of spiritual openness where a person now says, okay, how do I keep this forever? How do I keep this forever? How do I make sure that this lasts forever? And while that's an understandable desire and a desirable response, why? Because we're trying to shift from that momentary type of spiritual illumination towards lasting spiritual illumination. And so the desire for continuity is real. But nevertheless, the first need to say, how do I make sure that this lasts forever? How do I ensure that this doesn't fall away? How do I ensure that I don't go back to the old way? That's rooted not so much in a love of the present feeling of goodness, but in a fear of going back or losing the present moment of goodness. The self is so afraid of tasting light or tasting calmness or tasting illumination because we've identified with the nefesh and the ruach for so long that we assume that any deviation away from that and any freedom from that and any moichen and any faith and any calm and any happiness is not our true self. And in fact, we're going to probably lose it because we're not good enough and we're going to destroy it. And then it becomes not only not enjoying that light of the neshama, but more of a fear and an anxious anticipation of when is the neshama's light going to leave me. And that leads us generally into our self-determined kind of self-fulfilled prophecies where instead of enjoying the light of the neshama, we're worrying more about when the light of the neshama is going to depart. And it's easier to manage the destruction of the neshama on our own. So we fall into old matters of behavior. And then we say, oh, I knew it all along. It wasn't going to last. And so the all too human desire is at the moment of a positive shift, at the moment of a shifting of the orientation of our thinking towards the good through the neshama, it's, oh my gosh, I need to learn how to make sure that I don't mess this up. I don't want to be the one that messes up this spiritual illumination. Teach me how to respect you properly, neshama. The body and the heart say, teach me, what do I need to do to make sure that you never leave? Please don't go, please don't go. I'll eat you up. I love you so. I'm so afraid of losing you. I'm so afraid of you going away, neshama. Tell me, what do I need to do to make sure that I don't offend you? How can I be good enough to ensure that you want to stay with me? That's the first infantile desire for spiritual illumination, where we say to ourselves that, oh my gosh, I love this new feeling so much, and I'm so afraid I'm going to lose it. So how can I show you the proper kavod? How can I make sure not to offend you? How can I make sure to keep you forever? And this is a problematic feeling for a number of reasons. But instead of the neshama giving the nefesh and the ruach the clarity and saying, here's how you know that you're going to have me forever. Here's how you know that I'm going to stay forever. Instead, he answers, Ainli Panai. I'm not going to give you the answer right now as to how to treat me respectfully or how to ensure that you don't offend me. That's not the real question at the beginning of spiritual insight. The desire for the permanency and the nitzchius of that spiritual insight is at the beginning more often rooted in the anxious anticipation over losing it. And from that place, we can't properly learn how to maintain spiritual mindsets. Because if we're afraid we're going to lose the illumination of the neshama, which is the guest, and therefore we want to do whatever we can to ensure that it stays. The illumination of the neshama then becomes something that is dependent upon doing those things. And we know that kol ahava shetali bedavar sofer lehisbatel, that all love that is dependent on something is in the end of the day going to fall apart because it's not essential. The relationship between the neshama and the nefesh and the ruach, the higher part of self and the lower part of self, is essential. And therefore, it's not so much about learning what do I need to do in order to make sure this never goes away, but rather it's about letting go of that anxiety, realizing that I don't have to be concerned as to how long this spiritual insight is going to stay. I have to allow it to truly have an impact on me right now, to affect me. And if I allow it to affect me properly, then naturally it's going to last forever. But the considerations of how do I make this last forever in the moment that I begin to feel that something is authentic already takes me out of that authenticity. And therefore, the neshama doesn't say, here's how you treat me respectfully, or here's how you make sure that you don't offend me. He says, Ainli Panai, I'll return to you. I'll return to you. Those questions will be answered in the future. If a person truly becomes someone who's inspired by the neshama, someone who knows how to breathe deeply, someone who knows how to draw down calmness and spiritual illumination in whatever moment they find themselves in. So then eventually they're going to learn later on, I'll come closer to you in the future, I'll teach you how to be respectful towards this and what tools are necessary and the kedusha and the tahara that's necessary to cultivate spiritual life. But at the beginning, and suddenly the self is going through this process that, okay, I want to open myself up to the spiritual illumination, but then I fall into this all-too-human desire to make sure that the spiritual illumination will stay forever. And then suddenly the spiritual illumination seems to be on its way, seems to be leaving. But this is ultimately where we're going to really experience the true test of drawing that spiritual insight back down. In my ability to let go and my ability to realize that I can't hold on to this forever. I can't ensure that spirituality operate in accordance with my own considerations. I have to respect the light of the neshama enough to trust that it knows how to illuminate its way. It knows what it needs to do. And it's only when I'm able to relinquish this control of being the Baal Habayis over the neshama and realizing that in truth the neshama is the Baal Habayis over the nefesh and the ruach, only then can I begin to identify with the neshama. The all too human desire to say, how can I make this last? How can I bring the proper vessels here for it to make sure that it doesn't go away? That's still operating under the assumption that the nefesh, the body, and the ruach, which is the emotional feeling center, are the most significant part of the self. And therefore, it's up to them to figure out how to draw down the neshama. But in truth, what's happening when the guest arrives and it starts revealing that it is in itself the Baal Habayis Ha'amiti, so then we come to identify more with the neshama and we stop worrying so much about the way in which we ensure this lasts forever. Rabbeinu's vision continues. Va'amar lo. So once the guest hears that once the Baal Habayis hears that the guest has to leave, he says, with regards to this, also I need to learn from you. How long do I have to escort you out of my home for? How can I help you take leave? How do I escort you out of my house? How do I ensure the continuity of the experience, at least by knowing how to end it properly? How do I escort you? Va'amar lo ad achar pasach. Walk just a little bit beyond the threshold. And he begins to think, should I go out with him or not? The Baal Habayis begins to be concerned again. Anytime that there's a new influx of a level available, so that concern returns. He begins to think, should I go out with him? Should I not go out with him? Right now, I'm in the protection of my own house. I'm amongst other people. If I go out with him, I'll be alone. Who knows what's going to happen to me? He opens himself up into that wonder again, that concern. V'sha'allo v'amarlo. And the guest, as he was leaving, asks him, are you coming? And the Baal Habayis responds, Yeshli pachad letzesischem, I'm afraid. I'm afraid to destabilize. I'm afraid to leave the threshold of what I'm comfortable with. V'heshivlo, and he answers, Im ani yachol kazos lilmodimcha gam ata, im ertza la'asos lecha eza davar mi'imcha biyadi. And the guest says to him, listen, you're afraid to walk out of the threshold of the house with me? If I'm as powerful enough to teach you what your own mind is saying, am I not powerful enough to do whatever it is that I want with you? And at that moment, the Balabayas hears this, and he walks beyond the threshold with him. The threshold is that liminal space between the inside and the outside. The whole goal of the neshama's visitation to the body, the whole revelation of the neshama, which is drawing down the light of the future, is to destabilize the sense of ownership that the body and the ruach has over reality. Because as long as we identify only with the nair, but not with the light that's ascending from the nair, then we'll always associate ourselves with the lower aspects of existence. We'll always associate ourselves within the animalistic process of this battlefield of the nefesh habahamis and the nefesh halukus. We have to learn how to destabilize the sense of orientation from the body and the soul and the ruach and begin to identify with the neshama. Begin to understand where we come from. Begin to understand what our true self is. And therefore, this question that the Baal HaBayis is asking is the next proper step in terms of integrating new spiritual awareness into ourselves, new information that's going to change the way we function. The question is, if you're not staying forever, and you're not going to teach me how to maintain this awareness forever, then at least teach me how to take leave of it. At least teach me how to say goodbye to it in the proper way and watch it go away, but in such a way that I'm not going to feel that, oh, it came once and it's never going to come again, as previous moments of spiritual tourism. But I want to know how to maintain a connection, a vestige of interest and a rootedness and a trace of this spiritual experience. And sometimes in the spiritual experience, anytime we grow in Avodas Hashem, anytime we cultivate new forms of thinking with Hashem, with the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's infinite light, the light of the Torah, the light of Davening, the recognition of Emunah, the recognition of Bittul and Dveikus and Tainug and all rightness and all of these good things. The question has to be, how do I become aware of the fact that this is truly me, even though it's not lasting forever? How am I malava it? How do I escort this? To escort a guest from the home is to, as the Baal HaBayis, to walk out of the home, to relinquish my role as a Baal HaBayis and enter into the outside territory of the guest and destabilize myself. That's the goal of any visitation from any guest, should be a slackening on the sense of ownership and control and authority that the Baal HaBayis has. Because the true illumination of Or Ches, of the light of Bina, is to be Ma'orimi and Tshuva, to help me return back to Shemayim instead of being so stuck in the Aretz. And so the true test is ultimately going to be, as the Baal HaBayis, can you leave the threshold of your home? Can you relinquish control enough for but a moment and put yourself into that vulnerable, ambiguous state of potentially being affected, potentially having the guest leave a real lasting mark? Leave a real lasting mark on me? Can the neshama really engrave a new sense of information that reorients my entire way of functioning, to the degree that, yes, I can let go of those things that I'm afraid of letting go of. I could take on things that I was afraid of taking on. If I begin to identify with my neshama, then I begin to think differently about myself. And that's the test. The neshama is asking the nefesh and the ruach, are you capable of leaving the threshold of your home? Are you capable of illuminating the light outside of the home? And that place, naturally, is a place of fear. It's a place of the unknown. I don't know what's going to be when I relinquish my present state of mind. I don't know what's going to be when I stop identifying with all of the pekalach and all of the small things that I continue to identify myself with. I don't know what's going to happen when I actually take a step of freedom into the unknown and I enable myself to be open to that which is uncertain. It's a terrifying place. And again, in that place, the Baal HaBayis, the Nefesh and the Ruach, they want to say, Ahavti es Adonai, I love my master. Why should I leave? Why should I leave? Why should I go out? Why should I depart from the known if it's working for me? It's a place of civility. I know what's going on in my home. I know my body. I know my emotional frequencies. Why open myself up to a new way of thinking, to a new download that enables me to see life in a different way, to see my struggles in a different way, to see other people in a different way? And that's this awakening that the Baal HaBayis begins to have. He says, I want to learn how to be malava you. but at the same point, I'm afraid. And really, in truth, the step that the nefesh and the ruach takes, that the balabayas takes, that really enables this to become a formidable educational spiritual experience, is that he acknowledges his concern. He says, "Bepem male, yesh li pachad leitzei simchem." I'm afraid to leave with you. I'm afraid. Ahavti asadoni. I love what I'm familiar with. I love my nefesh and ruach identification. Sure, a candle is only truly beneficial when it's lit, but I'd rather have the candle in its sturdiness than the questionability of whether it's lit or not. Let me stay in my nefesh and my ruach. And he expresses itself. I'm afraid. I'm afraid. And here's where the most remarkable answer comes in, that the Oireach, the light of the Neshama, the light of Bina, says, listen, you've already welcomed me in. You're already drinking from the fount of La'asid Lavo. You're already exposed to Kedusha. You're already connected. The moment you know that there's a neshama, then you enter into a lifelong battle with coming to terms with the fact that I have a neshama. As Rebbe Nachman says, there's so many people who fight their entire lives against acknowledging the neshama, and they run to the farthest places imaginable, only to find over and over that the neshama is there waiting for them, because there's no place too far that the neshama is not going to be revealed. The neshama is saying to the nefesh and the ruach, when it's finally in the beginning stages of actually changing, when it stopped trying to make things permanent and stopped trying to qualify and quantify, but rather is exposed to the openness and it goes past the threshold. So that awareness is that I'm already being illuminated by the neshama. I already know too much. Once you begin to know about the spiritual depths of self, a person is never the same. A person can cover it over. A person can build thicker walls, but spiritual awareness, once it comes down, is never the same. And that's what the neshama is saying to the balabayas. He's saying, balabayas, you're afraid to walk out with me. You know me already. You met me. You saw the illumination of the neshama. You saw what you can feel. You saw kirvas alekim litov. You saw what it means to live with neshama shenasata bi tahoirahi, to believe in the undying, unlimited, unmitigated holiness and kedusha and tahara that permeates and saturates every aspect of what it means to be a Jew in this world, to have a neshama that's meir esap sachim, that shines light in these low places. There's no denying it. You're afraid to come out with me? I could do whatever I want with you, Neshama says. And at that point, there's a certain yeyush, a yeyush on the old way of living, a hopefulness towards spiritual change, a yeyush on remaining stuck in my old addictions and my own habits, a yeyush on being able to continuously identify only as my neshama and my ruach, because I know what it's like there, and I know the cycles, and I know the patterns, and I know the ups and the downs. A person has to lose hope in that. A person has to realize, you know what, I know too much about the neshama to ever go back to the way that I was. And even if I, God forbid, fall back into the way that I thought I was, I still don't identify with that. I identify with the neshama. And at that place, he walks out of the house. And this is where the balabayas is truly ready to receive from the oreach, truly ready to receive the light of the neshama, because he's no longer operating within the threshold of his comfort zone. He walks out into that vulnerable space of openness towards change. ולוקח מלבוש ונשן לו, ואמר לו, כך זה המלבוש וייטב לך. Immediately, the moment that he steps out of the threshold, the guest grabs the host and he begins to fly away with him. And the host who had stepped out of the threshold begins to feel very cold. And the guest who's flying with this host who he's taken off the threshold gives him a garment, gives him a cloak, gives him a coat. And he gives it over to him and he says, take this garment, take this coat, and it'll be good for you. And you'll be able to eat and drink, and all of the goodness will be there for you, and you'll be able to return back to your house. And they continue to fly. In the midst of all of this, in the midst of this flight of fancy, the balabayas looks and suddenly he's back in his house. He's not flying in the air with the guest. The Lohaya Matman, he didn't believe what was going on. He had no idea what was happening. He couldn't believe that it was in his house, because he looked around, but he saw that he was in his house. He was speaking to the family members that were in the house. He was eating and drinking with them. But then suddenly, in the midst of being surprised that he was in his house, he returned and he looked, and suddenly he was flying in the air as he was beforehand. And then he looked back and he was in the house again, and then he looked back and he was in the air. And this is what it went on as, back and forth, in the air, in the house, in the air, in the house. So what happens is as follows, is that once the neshama begins to reveal its true strength, and it says, you can't stay in the house anymore. You know about me. You know about the koach. You know that there's a river that flows forth from Gan Eden and drips into the mind. You know that the nefesh and the ruach, the body and the feeling centers, are not the end all be all of the self. You've been exposed to the light of the neshama on the first night of Hanukkah. And the question now is, are you going to be able to properly integrate the spiritual illumination? And the spiritual illumination takes place as follows. Once a person has been willing to let go of ownership, to let go of the security of affirmed continuity, but rather a person is able to surrender themselves to the neshama, to relinquish the control of the self and to open it up to the mind. And neshama shenasata b'tahirahi, and nishma shakai tavinem, and to realize that the ikar light of a person's motivations is the goodness that comes from the loftiest places. In that moment, spiritual illumination takes place, and it's a sudden up and then a coming back down, and then an up and a coming back down, and an up and a coming back down, until a person does not know how it could be that both of these positions are being occupied at once in terms of spiritual growth. When a person is growing spiritually, sometimes it's going to be flying upwards, and sometimes it's going to be the need to descend downwards. The Ratza Veshov, up and down, winning and losing, Shemayim and Aretz. Now, at first, there's a sudden burst of inspiration. The Balabayas is now being taken by the Oreach and he's flying into Shamayim. That's the experience of the Neshama. But what the Balabayas says at that moment is, it's karli, it's cold for me. It's cold for me because the Neshama yearns for home. The Neshama yearns for a place of sustenance. The Neshama yearns for a place where it can truly bring about the greatest matmoinim to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is dir b'tachtoinim. And so when the neshama is all the way above in Shamayim, when it's flying high with the neshama, there's a certain coldness. There's no varmkeit. There's no heimlichkeit. There's no homeliness. There's no sense of comfort, and there's no sense of the known and that which is familiar. But rather, it's the celestial realms. It's where a person is encountering places that are so profoundly illuminated, concepts of godliness and concepts of infinitude that seem to depersonalize the spiritual experience, that throw a person all the way into ayin. But then this is exactly what the neshama is protecting the nefesh and the ruach from. It's telling the body, no, don't worry. You feel cold, but here's a malbush, here's a levush. The levush is here to provide you with that sense of warmth and connectivity. Spirituality is not meant to just be an ascent upwards and a flight of fancy towards transcendence. It's meant to be a real integrated experience of drawing it down into a place of vitality and satiety, of interiority, of an imminent experience. That's the levush, the halbashas haoros, is the ability to draw that light of spirituality down into experience. And so at first, the neshama flies upwards and it feels the coldness of being in the bitul muchletes, where there's no hargasha, where there's no feeling, where there's no personal identification, where there's no attachments, but rather it's full and complete annihilation of ego. But there's a certain lack of human connectivity there and the warmth that comes from it. And the neshama is not actively fighting against being human. Adarabba, the goal is to be human with the neshama, to draw the neshama back down into this world, to illuminate this world. And so the neshama gives a levush, it gives a garment, and it says here, eating, drinking, being in your house, you'll be able to do all of these things. That's not antagonistic to the neshama. Those are vessels for the neshama. And then what the Balabayas realizes, the nefesh and the ruach, which is learning now what it means to identify as a neshama, is that I can be above, I can be below. I don't even understand how it's possible that when I'm above, I'm suddenly below, and when I'm below, I'm suddenly above. But kachava, this is how it is, and this is how it goes for a very long time. A person can be sitting in their home, and with the proper kivun hadas, in the proper moment, they could be back in Himmel, they could be back in Shemayim, they could be contemplating Enon Milvado. In the next moment, they can hear their children crying, and the goal of Enon Milvado is to be awoken by a child crying, and you have to tend to that child. It's above and below at once. It's aniva ayin bevasachas. This is what the neshama is teaching the balabayas. This is what the neshama is teaching the body. And now we're coming into the next stage of the Maisa, which is ultimately going to be about how to draw this down, how to reveal this in real day-to-day life. Afterwards, after this back and forth of going up and down and returning and running and returning, he descends back down. And he finds himself situated between two mountains to each side of him, sitting in the valley between these two mountains. And in that valley, he finds a book. And in that book, there were permutations of letters, and the letters were Aleph, Zayin, Ches, Hu, Dalid, V'chulei. And the engravings in that book were the letter Aleph, the letter Zayin, the letter Ches, and the word Hu, and the letter Dalid, and etc. And in that book, with these permutations of letters, were all of the diagrams and the drawings of all of the vessels. And within the vessels in those pictures were resting letters. And within these vessels were the letters of the names of the vessels themselves, so that those letters inside of the vessels can form the very vessel that they were sitting inside of. And the Balabayas had a tremendous cheshek, a tremendous desire to learn this book. So what's happening is as follows, is that after there's a spiritual illumination, after the neshama comes to be meir, the nefesh and the ruach, and there's a hitznotzitzutz, there's a sparking, there's a drop down from the nachal elyon, from the nahar hayotzim eda, from the nafshi chigsa la Hashem, from the nachal novea makor chachma, from the nachal of bina that draws forth from the fount of chachma. That hitznotzitzutz takes place, and then a person finds themselves between two harim in the valley. The two harim are Chachma and Bina. To the right of me, Esa Enai el HaHarim Me'ayin Yivo Ezri. The harim are the horim, they're the parents, the Abba and Ima, it's Chachma and Bina. Chachma and Bina give shape to a valley, which is going to be Das. Meaning to say that true spiritual experience is when the nefesh and the ruach, the body and the emotional reservoirs, draw down the light of the neshama, of Bina, into the mind. And through the light of Bina, there's a drop of chachma that comes back down. The shemen is revealed, and in that place, there's illumination. And then the question is, das, how do I draw this back down? How do I draw down this spiritual illumination? Now the question is, how do I make vessels for it? At the beginning, the question is not, how do I make sure that this lasts forever? Because that's not up to me in the beginning. The real question is, how do I make a vessel for this? And so when it comes to spiritual experience, we're always dealing with the neshama, but the neshama is schlepping along with it a certain light of the chaya, the light of chachma. Because even though the main place in which illumination comes forth is the neshama shabamoichi, which corresponds to bina, b'nei bina, yemei shmona, that's the light of ches. Nevertheless, Bina is never alone without Chachma. They're train rein delemas parshan, meaning to say that the understanding of the neshama is always drawing upon a deeper secretion of illumination, which is the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kaviyachal, which comes down through the Chaya. The Chaya is the makif. The Chaya is that which doesn't even enter into consideration right now. It's not the guest. The guest is the neshama. The Chaya is the one that sends the guest. And so therefore, when a person experiences any spiritual illumination where the body begins to wake up and it begins to try and take score or keep score of the future, to remember Alma Da'asi, so it's always wedged between Chachma and Bina. One har on the right of me, which is Chachma, the illumination, and one har on the left of me, which is Bina. Now, the main source of illumination for the body and for the heart is going to be from the neshama. But the neshama of Bina is always drawing down Chachma as well in it. So it's always two harim, even though we have to focus on the har of Bina. We need to draw down the moichim from Eim Habanim Smecha. That's where our consciousness comes from. That's where the neshama comes down from. But at the same point, we always have to remember that there's a light of bittul, there's a light of chachma, there's a light that exceeds the frame that's always being drawn down. So in this place of das, sitting in the valley between these two mountains of spiritual awareness, the question is, how do I draw this down? Das is the gesher tsar ma'od ma'od. It's the very narrow bridge that ensures the ability to draw spiritual illumination, not from above into the mind, but from above into the mind, down into the heart and into the body. And that could be a remez to Begai. He was sitting in a valley. Gai is Gimel Yud Aleph, which is the gematria of 13. It's the 13 midos of Rachamim. It's the 13 midos Shator Nedreshes Bahem. It's the 13 walls that the Yavanim came to break. 13 is the gematria of Echad, of Ahava. It's the form of connection. It's Das. How do I draw this down? How do I love this experience enough to want to draw it down completely into experience? What does he see there? What he sees there is the book, and it's the book of letters. And it's a book of letters, but also of vessels. And it's not only a book of letters and vessels, but it's a book of vessels that have letters inside of it. And it's not only a book of vessels that have letters inside of it, but the letters inside of each vessel are the very fabric and foundation from which the vessel itself is emerging. And so what are we talking about here? And it's all B'derech Efshar. We know that the Iker Giloy of Elokus is down here in this world, is within the body itself, is within the Ner. Even though we want to illuminate the neshama and we want to draw down from chachma and we want to taste the bittul of keser, nevertheless, HaKadosh Baruch Hu desires a dir b'tachtonim, which is the body and the felt sense of experience, the lived orientation towards this world. And so, on the one hand, the body is the lowest thing, and we want to elevate ourselves up to the neshama, which is the candle. But at the same point, without the body, without the emotionally lived experience of being in a body and embodiment, then there would be no way in which the candle can be lit. So the goal is to become aware of Or, to become fundamentally aware of the Or being present, and to allow the Or, to allow the light to soften the darkness of the self, to break free from barriers that we felt were unbreakable, to cover over concealments that we thought could never be removed. We have to allow the light to shine itself onto every aspect of ourselves, to bathe in the light, to be illuminated by the light, to be healed by the light. That's the secret of the Or Haganas. A person has access to it, a person can enter into it. But the Iker of all Ikarim is to draw that Or Haganuz back down into the Nefesh and the Ruach, and to light the candle, and to illuminate the darkness. The body and the felt experience is what lives in darkness, and the goal is to illuminate the darkness. And therefore, once a person comes down from spiritual experience, once a person has experienced the union of Chachma and Bina, and the lofty up and down and being above and below at once, then the work of vessel building begins. Here's where the slow and steady process of integration and integrating spiritual awareness into our being is. Okay, I just read something in Rebbe Nachman. How do I live with this now? I just saw something in the Alter Rebbe. I just saw something in the Gra. I just saw something in the Rashash, in the Ramchal, in Shas, in Poiskim. I saw something, and now I want to live with this. I want to daven on it. I want to bring it down into consciousness. This is where vessel building begins. And this is the work of this Bal Habayis who has now been exposed to the wonder of the neshama. This is the work, to sit in the valley in between Chachma and Bina and to build Das, to learn the circuitous pathways of spiritual influence and how to draw it down. But when a person is building vessels, when a person enters into a vessel building process and they're trying to integrate their spiritual awareness with day-to-day life and the chaos of day-to-day life, very often there's a stira, there's a paradox. And this is in truth what happened during the shattering of the vessels, that there was a stira, there was a paradox between the lights and the vessels, because light represents above and vessels represent constriction. Light represents illumination and vessels represent darkness. Lights represent godliness. Vessels represent the opposite of godliness, or the apparent concealment of godliness. So in the beginning, there's a threat that if I'm trying to draw down spiritual illumination, I'm trying to draw down my awareness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu into this darkened world, I have to be aware that at the beginning, I might feel a deep divide or a deep contradiction between my spiritual self and my real life experience, between the Or and the Kli. And here's where Rabbeinu is revealing something to us in his vision that's explicit in the Arizal and Shar HaAkudim, and is the depth of the Baal HaSulam, and is the depth of the Derech of the Baal Shem Tov, and it's the depth of the path of the Gra as well. It's the secret that in truth, the vessels themselves are made of light. The vessels themselves are in truth just osios. The things that appear to be opposite from spirituality are not opposite from spirituality. They're just spiritual expressions of what appears to be opposite of spirituality. The containment, the darkness, the constriction, all of it, including the slightest level to the thickest level, is all the congealment of divinity, the congealment of divine light rather, and it enables us to hold it. the Kalim look so separate from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They look totally different and nearly opposite. Not nearly opposite, fundamentally opposite. And our job is to dig down deep into the vessels and come to realize that in truth they're just osios, and osios are just sparks of light, and those are sparks of light that are drawing down an infinite light from above. And if we gaze deeply enough and we contemplate deeply enough the nature of Kalim, the nature of this worldly experience, the nature of Yichud Tata, the nature of this worldliness, the nature of the body, the nature of all of the human conditionality of all of it, and we come to realize that it too is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is revealing himself in this way, in that moment, the vessel is no longer going to be a contradictory, antagonistic thing to the light. Adarabah, it's going to know its role is to draw down more of the light in a different way. This is what he's seeing in this book. HaKadosh Baruch Hu built the world out of the book. There is a book that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wrote, says Rav Tzadok, and that is the world. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu wrote a commentary on that book, and that is the Torah. The world is a book. The world is La'olam Devarecha Hashem Nitzav B'Shamayim. It's the Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet, Hey. It's the light, the Osios, the Asfan, the Kedusha, those spiritual marks and engravings that are drawn down from the loftiest places imaginable, from the Olam HaMalbish, from the highest place imaginable. We draw down the Osios. And the Osios are the beginning of congealment. And the beginning of congealment is the development of concealment. And concealment eventually expresses itself by way of vessels which are opposite to the light. But our job is not to be nispala from the darkness, but to see through the darkness and to realize that the vessel itself is an expression of the light as well. That's seeing within the book that there were letters, that ultimately the whole world, which is the book, is composed of letters. And those letters eventually build kalim. And not only that, but inside of the kalim are the letters, meaning to say that the kalim develop out of the letters, and then we have the ability of descending down deep and seeing how in truth it's only letters. And when a person is aware of this, we're aware that the things that appear to be opposite spirituality, the vessels that I need to do in my life, the carpools, the this, the that, the development of the body and the ruach to hold that illumination, that is also osios. That's also osios for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the neshama begins to have a cheshek to learn how to build kalim, a cheshek out of how to build vessels for the light. The vessels, the need to integrate and come back down is no longer going to be threatening, but rather it's going to be something that drives the soul crazy. It's something that the soul is going to run after. Now, I don't know the tzirufei osios that he saw in this book. Aleph, Zayin, Ches, Hu Dalid, V'chulei. Hudalid v'chulei. The letter Aleph, the letter Zayin, the letter Ches, and then the statement that those letters, Aleph, Zayin, Ches, are Dalid. But B'derech Efshar, we can say as follows: that Zayin is Chesed, Gvura, Tferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchus. It's the Nefesh and the Ruach. The Nefesh is Malchus, the Ruach is Zer Anpin. It's the body and the emotionally felt space. That's the 7 days of the week. That's the 7 days of natural order. That's subject to falling. That's the beginning of existence where I only identify myself as a body. And then there's the Aleph that comes, that Aleph of Ima Ilav, Ehekev, Bina, that descends down and it fulfills and it reveals that no, in truth, there's a light of the Neshama. So that's Aleph, the light of the Neshama, shines forth on Zayin, which is the Zayin Imei Habinyan, which is the Nefesh and the Ruach. And then it leads to Ches, meaning to say it's not just an addition, but now they form a grand unity, that through the illumination of the Neshama, we come to look at all of the Midos in a fundamentally different way. We come to realize that all of this together, who Dalid v'chulei, is going to be the secret of the Dalid osios of the Shem Havaya, and v'chulei can be the gematria of the Shem Havaya. That it's only when I unify the light of Bina with Zer Anpin and Malchus, the light of the Neshama with the Ruach and the Nefesh, then can I become the Merkava to reveal the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And all letters are ultimately pointing back to the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But we see that the next step is drawing down the spiritual experience and ensuring that it finds expression within vessels, and not to feel that the vessels are contradictory or paradoxical to the light, because they are simply byproducts of the light. Suddenly, the Balabayas, who had gone through this entire ascension and found himself down in the valley now, he looks and suddenly is in his house again. And then he turns back and he looks and then he's in the valley again. So he's going back through this back and forth now. It's the process of learning how to build vessels. The secret of him building vessels, seeing the book that teaches you how to build vessels, and then looking back and seeing himself back in his house, is the fact that the Iker Giloi of the Kedusha of the Neshama is to bring it back into the house, is to illuminate the home, is to illuminate the family, is to bring that light down and share it with other people, babayis, to make a Beis HaMikdash out of one's own home. That in this valley of building vessels, he knows where the true vessels are going to be. The true vessels are going to be in his house. That's the main place in which the spiritual cultivation is going to have to be revealed. And in that moment, he decided, he has Yishuv Hadas, now he knows, understands that the neshama is part of his orientation. And he decides to climb back up the mountain to figure out which way to go from here, to figure out what's the best path. Maybe I'll find a way of getting back home. When he arrives at that mountain, he climbs up and he sees that standing upon the mountain is a golden tree with golden branches. And on each and every branch, there were vessels. And these were the vessels that were shown in the book. And within each of these vessels were other vessels through which the bigger vessels were made. And he desired so deeply to take from these vessels, but he wasn't able to, because they were caught up and tied up together in the thicket. And they were all this way and that way and entangled. And suddenly he looks and he was there back in his house again. So here's something that's very teeth, that we said that there's two mountains. Whenever a person is experiencing something, the illumination of the neshama is coming from bina. Neshama shenasata bi tahirahi. It's within the mind. It's a pnimi. That's what illuminates the zayin tachtonim. That's what illuminates the body and the ruach. But the neshama doesn't work on its own. The neshama is always fundamentally connected to the chaya, and the chaya is the light of chayim, is the light of chachma, is the light of bittul, and it's what extends outwards beyond the individual. So there's always two mountains that a person can try and climb back up to in order to figure out how to integrate spiritual experience. The right side, the right brain, the right mountain is chachma, and the left side is bina and gevura. Now, chachma is beyond us. We don't have access to chachma. We only have access to chachma by way of bina. And therefore, when he climbs up the mountain, he seemingly goes to the mountain of bina. Why do we know that he goes to the mountain of bina? Because bina is gevura. Gevura is zahav, is gold. Gold, we know, unlike kesef, which is the kitzufin of chachma, that gold represents the zahav of bina. And the entanglement of the branches and all of the possibilities and the maven davar mitoch davar and the working on vessel building, that's all done in the space of bina. Bina is, okay, how do I draw the aleph to the zayin to make it a ches so that it could uncover the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Those sirufei osios that he saw in that book. And so the shaila is, how do I draw down now from bina? How do I levavo yavin v'shav? How do I draw down actuality by way of bina? And that's the gevura of the zahav. And that's why he wants to get to the kalim, but he's being told that no, it's going to take time. The work of bina is the recognition that things take time. But this is really the true illumination. The real spiritual experience is taking place where a person is coming to realize that, okay, it exists within me. And it's a slow and steady process of cultivating that light that always exists within me and ensuring that it can be revealed in a real and formidable way in my life. And understanding that the vessels that I build for myself are not in opposition to the light, but rather the congealment of light. And suddenly he looks and he's back in his house. And that house is the place of those vessels. B'nai Bina Yemei Shmona, the whole edifice of Chanukah's Chanukah Sabayis, is realizing that each and every person in their own home is the Kohen Gadol. And each and every person in their own way has the responsibility of building Beis HaMikdash. And it was a wonder in his eyes. It was a tremendous wonder in his eyes. He knew the hisnutzitz of Keser here. That at one moment I'm here, at one moment I'm there. One moment I'm at home, one moment I'm in the valley. And he desired so desperately to tell people about what was going on, to tell the people in his home what was happening to him. But how do you tell somebody such a wondrous thing, such an unbelievable thing, that it wouldn't even make sense if they believed it, because it's been this inner process of back and forth, back and forth. And suddenly he looked through the window and he saw the guest waiting outside. He saw the guest waiting there. And he began desiring so deeply that the guest should come back in, should come to him, to come to him. And the guest says, I don't have time. I'm leaving. I'm leaving to come to you. I don't have time to stay. I'm outside the window, but I'm leaving to come to you. Because what's happening now is that he's sitting at home. He's sitting at home and he wants so badly to share the spiritual experience. He wants so badly to tell of the illumination of the neshama and the new wisdom, the new unbelievable wisdom of Einon Milvado and Leis Asar Panimine and Soviet Kalam and Mamala Kalam, and he wants to share it. He wants to share how the neshama has secreted its light into the body and has enabled the body to become a receptacle that reveals the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu rather than concealing it. The Ner Hashem, Nishmas Adam, how the Nefesh and the Ruach, the body and the emotionally felt experience can in truth be revelatory of the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he doesn't know how to communicate this. It's incommunicable. You cannot share the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ki ani yadati, as Rabbeinu says, I know, says David HaMelech, I know how great God is. I and I alone, because I can't convey it to anybody, not even myself. And suddenly he sees the guests and he's saying, oh, come in. I have proof. There's a chalon. It's looking out to far away and saying, come in, come, prove it to them. And what does the guest say? He says, I can't come in. I'm not really here. I'm already walking towards you. I'm already inside. I'm already integrated. The neshama is there. It doesn't have to be proven. It doesn't have to be validated. The neshama leaves a very subtle glow within the mind that after its illumination, the trace is there by way of menuchas hanefesh and yishuv hadas. And that's why the neshama is saying, I'm coming to you. I'm coming to you. And the balabayas, the nefesh and the ruach, the body that is now beginning to draw down the light of the neshama as illuminated from the Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. He says to the guest, he says to the neshama, this is so wondrous in my eyes. I'm sitting here in my home. What does this mean you're walking towards me? I'm right here and you're right here. So that means that you're already here. And the Orech answers him and he says, here's the secret. In the moment that you decided that you were willing to walk past the threshold, that you accepted to walk with me and to escort me out of the threshold, to leave that self-contained comfort and assumption of what I am, and to be miyayish on all of the smallness and to enter into expansivity. At that moment, says the neshama, I took your neshama from you. And in its stead, I placed within you a levush from Gan Eden HaTachton, from the true place of the neshama. I took your old neshama that seems to have grown into a certain space of forgetfulness, and I was malbish you with the light of Gan Eden again, which is nothing other than the neshama itself, Gan Eden HaTachton, the light of Bina. I gave you a levush, I gave you a garment that would enable you to see the true secret of spirituality, which is to be above and below at once. But your body and your guf and your ruach, that was there, that's the ner. That remained at home. Anytime you attached your mind back to home, back to your body, back to the kalim, back to the knowledge that I have to bring it down here, you were right back at home because you understood the secret. And you drew down the illumination of me. You drew that illumination down into your home. And when you returned back up and you wanted to be back up, that's when you were back up. Because a person is found in the place that their thoughts are found. And says the Balabayas, I don't know which world he came from. I don't know which world this neshama came from. I don't know where this illumination comes from. But it's most certainly from a good world. And the matter is not yet finished, and it has not been completed yet. How, what, we don't know. We just know it's good. The illumination of the neshama needs to be good. Or ki tov, the light is good. That's the light of Hanukkah. The Or HaGanuz is that where it comes from, how it comes, I don't know. It's good. The neshama secretes goodness into existence. And that goodness needs to be brought down into the vessels. That's the secret of the first night of Hanukkah. The Hanukkah Licht is bringing down the goodness into the vessels to reveal how the nefesh and the ruach, the body, need to become the site in which the neshama expresses itself. And the neshama has to come down and to be a guest in the body itself. And that the body has to remember that it's the balabayas, but only because that's where HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to rest in the dir b'tachtonim. And that it's ultimately good. Baruch sha'amar v'haya ha'olam. This is the vision. This is how I understand the vision this year. Be'ezras Hashem, we should be zoicha to everything, to comfort, to Yeshuos, to Nechamos, that everybody, every person should be illuminated with the light of Nechama and the true light of the guest, which is Mashiach Tzidkenu, to be mamtik all dinim, to get rid of all of the darkness, and to reveal how all of the kalim are ultimately made out of letters, and that the letters are at the center of everything, and that Hanero Salalu Kaddish Haim, and the vessel itself, the Ner and the Ruach, is in fact holy. It's illuminated with the holiness of Chachma and Keser and all of the illumination of above. And we should be zoichet to be mahapich all of the choshech into or, and to draw down the lights of sustenance from all of the Shiva Haroim and all of the Tzadikei Sod Olam, who are the candles of the menorah, and that we should draw forth the light of Ruach HaKodesh, the light of Nevuah, the light of Tov Ha'amiti into our lives, Be'ezras Hashem.